The hum of the fluorescent lights on the 14th floor of the Sterling and Vance law firm was the only sound left in the building. It was 8:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I was still at my desk, my eyes burning from staring at the dual monitors. My name is Sloan Bennett. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. I work as a senior real estate paralegal. My daily life revolves around millions of dollars. I draft purchase agreements, review title searches, and ensure that when wealthy people buy properties they'll only visit twice a year, the transaction is airtight. Tonight, I was finalizing a title commitment for a client purchasing a $3.2 million commercial space in downtown. The client's credit score was a pristine 810. His debt-to-income ratio was practically a mathematical masterpiece. I carefully checked the public records for any outstanding liens or encumbrances against the property, stamped my digital approval, and hit send. Then, I minimized the firm's software and opened my personal email. At the top of my inbox was an unread message from a property management company. I had applied for a small, slightly outdated one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't anything special. No luxury amenities, no in-unit washer and dryer, just a roof over my head that didn't have a mold problem like my current place. I clicked the email. Dear applicant, thank you for your interest in the Oakwood Apartments. Unfortunately, after running a comprehensive background and credit check, we are unable to approve your application at this time. Your current credit score of 515 and your history of severe delinquency do not meet our minimum requirements. I didn't cry. You don't cry when you've been reading variations of the same email for 13 years. You just go numb. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, a chair that cost more than my monthly rent, and looked down at my shoes. They were sensible, black pumps I'd bought on clearance at a discount store 3 years ago. The heel of the right shoe had started to peel, and I had carefully colored in the exposed white plastic with a black Sharpie that morning. I am 31 years old, I have a degree, a respectable career, and I know more about real estate law and financial compliance than most people will learn in a lifetime. Yet, on paper, I am a liability, a walking financial disaster. The nightmare started when I was 18. I had just started college when the collection calls began. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but the letters followed. Credit cards I had never opened, a massive personal loan I had never signed for, and utility bills for addresses I had never lived at. The debt totaled nearly $45,000. When I confronted my parents in a state of absolute panic, my mother had broken down in tears at the kitchen table. She confessed that things had gotten incredibly tight. My father's business had hit a rough patch, and they had used my social security number to keep the family afloat. It was just to keep the lights on, sweetie. She had sobbed into her hands, looking so small and defeated. We were going to pay it back before you even knew. We just needed a bridge. Please, don't hate us. What do you do when you are 18, terrified, and the people who gave you life are begging for your mercy? You don't call the police. You don't file a fraud report. You swallow the bitter pill. I agreed to take on the debt to save my parents from prison. I dropped out of my university, transferred to a cheaper community college, and started working 2 jobs. For 13 years, I have lived on a shoestring budget, sending hundreds of dollars every month to creditors for money I never spent. Slowly, agonizingly, I had paid off the bulk of it, but the late marks, the defaults, and the sheer length of the credit history damage meant my score was still trapped in the gutter. I closed the rejection email, packed my laptop into my worn-out tote bag, and turned off the office lights. I had a family dinner to attend, and being late was a cardinal sin in the Bennett household. The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs took 40 minutes. Their neighborhood was idyllic. Manicured lawns, 2-car garages, and American flags swaying gently on front porches. It was the house I grew up in, the house that supposedly almost went into foreclosure when I was a teenager, prompting the desperate theft of my identity. When I walked through the front door, the smell of rosemary and roasting lamb hit me. The house was immaculate, as always. My mother, Avery, was bustling in the kitchen, pouring wine into expensive crystal glasses. She is 55, but looks a decade younger, always perfectly put together with a fresh blowout and a cashmere cardigan draped over her shoulders. "Sloan, you're late, darling," she sang out, handing me a glass of water instead of wine. "We were just about to sit down." My father, Logan, was sitting in his leather recliner in the living room watching a golf tournament. He is 58, a man who communicates mostly in nods and grunts. He has mastered the art of being physically present but emotionally entirely absent. He looked up, gave me a brief, tight-lipped smile, and turned back to the TV. "Sorry," I said, setting my bag down. "Work ran late. We had a complicated closing." Well, leave the boring paperwork at the office tonight, a voice chimed in from the hallway. It was Delilah, my 26-year-old sister. Delilah is the golden child. She is an influencer who posts aesthetic vlogs about her morning routines, her designer matcha lattes, and her supposed journey as a self-made entrepreneur. She swept into the room wearing a silk slip dress that I knew cost at least $800, clinging to the arm of her fiancé, Wyatt Sterling. Wyatt was nice enough, but he was born on third base and thought he'd hit a triple. His family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the state. He was wealthy, oblivious, and entirely enchanted by Delilah's curated online persona. "Hey, Sloan," Wyatt said, giving me a polite wave. "Hi, Wyatt, Delilah, you look nice," I offered, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. Delilah looked me up and down, her eyes pausing on my scuffed black pumps and my off-the-rack gray slacks. "Thanks, you look comfortable, though I don't know how you wear those polyester blends all day. They totally suffocate the skin." "It's just for the office," I replied neutrally, moving toward the dining room. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. As we passed the roasted potatoes and asparagus, the conversation naturally steered toward Delilah and Wyatt's upcoming wedding, and more importantly, the house they were buying. "The inspection went perfectly," Wyatt announced, beaming. "It's a 5-bedroom modern farmhouse in the gated community over by the lake. We officially entered escrow on Friday." "Oh, it's a dream," Delilah gushed, taking a delicate sip of her Chardonnay. "It has the most incredible natural light for my content creation room, and the neighborhood is so exclusive. It's exactly what I've been working so hard for." I pushed a piece of lamb around my plate. A 5-bedroom house is a big commitment, especially with current interest rates. "You guys secured a good fixed-rate mortgage?" Delilah rolled her eyes. "God, Sloan, you always have to make everything sound so clinical and depressing." "Yes, we got a great rate, because unlike some people, I actually know how to manage my credit." The words hit me like a slap across the face. The silence in the room suddenly felt incredibly heavy. "Delilah," my father muttered, looking down at his plate. It was the most he had contributed to the conversation all night. I looked at my mother. I expected her to intervene, to remind Delilah of the sacrifice I was making, of the reason my credit was destroyed so theirs could survive. Instead, Avery offered a small, sympathetic sigh and reached out to pat Delilah's hand. "Now, Delilah, don't tease your sister," my mother said softly. But her tone wasn't a reprimand. It was the kind of soothing voice you use with a petulant child. She turned to Wyatt with a tight, apologetic smile. "Sloan has just had a bit of bad luck with her personal finances. It's ironic, really, isn't it? She works in real estate law, handling all those million-dollar contracts, but she still rents that little place in the city. But she's trying her best." My chest tightened so painfully I could barely draw a breath. Bad luck. She called 13 years of carrying her secret, 13 years of my stolen youth and ruined credit, bad luck. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up, flip the dining table, and scream the truth right into Wyatt's perfectly groomed face. I wanted to tell him that his self-made fiancé was wearing shoes bought with money I was still paying off. But I didn't, because I was trained to be the shock absorber for this family. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced a tight, polite smile. "It's a tough market," I managed to say, my voice eerily calm. "Congratulations on the house." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I excused myself as soon as dessert was cleared, claiming I had an early morning meeting with an attorney. I grabbed my tote bag from the living room and headed toward the kitchen to put my water glass in the dishwasher. The kitchen door was slightly ajar. I could hear my mother and Delilah inside, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "I don't like the attitude she was giving me at the table," Delilah was whispering, her influencer sweetness completely gone, replaced by a sharp, demanding edge. "She's always judging me. Just because she's miserable doesn't mean she gets to ruin my vibe." "Just ignore her, sweetheart," my mother murmured. "She's just jealous. She's stuck in a dead-end mindset." I froze, my hand hovering inches from the door handle. "Whatever," Delilah sighed. "Listen, Mom, about the house. Wyatt's parents are putting down a huge chunk for his half of the down payment. His lawyer is drawing up a co-ownership agreement. If I only put down what I have from my savings, my equity percentage on the deed is going to look pathetic compared to his. It makes me look like a gold digger." "I told you not to worry about that," Avery said, her voice dropping even lower. The sound of running water masked some of her words, but I strained to hear every syllable. "I'm going to wire an additional $150,000 into the escrow account before the closing date. It will be under your name. That way, you walk into that marriage with equal footing. Nobody will question your financial independence. Are you sure? $150,000 in cash? Delilah sounded thrilled, but slightly nervous. Where are you pulling that from without Dad noticing? I have my ways. You just focus on the wedding planning. The money will be in the escrow account by the end of the month. I stood in the dark hallway, the blood roaring in my ears. $150,000. My parents didn't have that kind of cash. My father was a middle manager at a logistics firm, and my mother worked part-time at a boutique. They lived comfortably, but they weren't sitting on a mountain of liquid assets. And if they somehow did have that kind of money, why hadn't they paid off the $45,000 debt they had saddled me with? Why was I eating instant ramen and wearing marker-stained shoes while my mother casually promised my sister a 6-figure cash injection? Nothing made sense. The math didn't add up. I didn't say goodbye. I set my glass down quietly on the hall table, walked out the front door, and got into my 10-year-old Honda Civic. As I drove back to my tiny, moldy apartment, my mind was racing, analyzing the situation the same way I would analyze a compromised legal document at the firm. I had spent my entire adult life believing a specific narrative, that my parents made a desperate, one-time mistake to save the family, and that I was doing the noble, daughterly thing by carrying the burden. But what if I was wrong? What if the story I had been told was a lie designed to keep me docile? I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was a senior real estate paralegal. I had access to county clerks, public property records, deed histories, and title registries. I had spent years tracking down hidden assets and untangling financial webs for strangers. Tomorrow morning, I wasn't going to look up a client's name. Tomorrow morning, I was going to look up my own. And I was going to find out exactly where my mother was getting that money. I arrived at the office at 6:15 a.m. the next morning. The sun hadn't even crested the downtown skyline yet, and the 14th floor was entirely empty. The only illumination came from the green emergency exit signs and the blinking server lights in the IT closet down the hall. I didn't turn on the overhead fluorescence. I walked straight to my desk, set my bag on the floor, and booted up my computer in the dark. My hands were remarkably steady, though my heart was beating with a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. In my line of work, you learn very quickly that paper doesn't lie. People cry, people swear on their children's lives, people concoct elaborate, tear-jerking narratives. But a recorded deed, a bank ledger, a wire transfer routing number, those are absolute. I opened our firm's proprietary title search software, a direct pipeline into the county clerk's database and the state's property registries. It cost the firm thousands of dollars a month to maintain this access, allowing us to pull high-resolution scans of every piece of real estate documentation filed in the state dating back to the 1900s. Usually, I type in the names of LLCs, shell corporations, or wealthy investors. Today, my fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second before I typed my own social security number and my full legal name. Before I hit enter, my mind drifted to my grandmother, Eleanor. She was my father's mother, a stern, pragmatic woman who smelled of peppermint and old paper. She didn't have much patience for my mother's obsession with appearances or my sister's childhood tantrums, but she and I had understood each other. When she passed away from a sudden stroke during my senior year of high school, it broke me. A month after I turned 18, the lawyer handling her estate informed us that she had left her house entirely to me. It was a modest, beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman home in a historic, tree-lined neighborhood. It was fully paid off. No mortgage. It was her final gift to me, a foundation for my life, ensuring I would never have to struggle. Or so I thought. 2 weeks after the title was transferred into my name, my mother had come into my bedroom, her eyes red and swollen. She locked the door, sat on the edge of my bed, and delivered a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She told me my father's business was going under. She said he had borrowed money from bad people to keep the logistics firm afloat, and they were threatening to take everything. We were going to lose our childhood home. He was going to go to prison for embezzlement. There's only one way out, Sloan. She had wept, clutching my hands so tightly her nails dug into my skin. We have to sell Grandma's house. The market is terrible right now, so we'll have to sell it at a massive loss to a cash buyer just to cover your father's debts immediately. I know it's yours. I know it's unfair. But please, if you don't sign the sale papers, our family is destroyed. I was 18. I was grieving my grandmother. I was terrified of seeing my father in handcuffs. So, I sat at the kitchen table a few days later, surrounded by a stack of dense, confusing legal documents, and I signed everywhere my mother had placed a yellow sticky tab. I didn't read them. I trusted my mother. She told me the house was sold, The debt was paid, but the residual penalties from my father's business failure had somehow attached to my social security number, which was why my credit was ruined. For 13 years, I mourned the loss of that house. I mourned the gift my grandmother had given me, believing I had sacrificed it on the altar of family loyalty. I took a breath and pressed enter on my keyboard. The database loaded for 3 seconds. A progress bar crawled across the screen. Then a list of indexed public records populated. There were dozens of entries. Far too many for a woman who supposedly owned nothing and rented a moldy apartment. I scrolled down to the oldest entry, dated exactly 13 years ago, roughly 3 weeks after my 18th birthday. I clicked on the PDF icon. The scan of the document opened on my right monitor. It wasn't a warranty deed. It wasn't a contract of sale. It was a deed of trust, a mortgage document. I stared at the grantor/grantee index. The property address was my grandmother's house. The owner listed was still me. The house had never been sold. My eyes darted down to the principal loan amount, $300,000. The lender was a prominent national bank. According to this document, I, Sloan Bennett, had taken out a $300,000 cash-out refinance on the free and clear property my grandmother had left me. "Oh my God," I whispered to the empty office. The air in my lungs turned to ice. I quickly pulled up the next document in the timeline. It was an assignment of rents. The house had been leased out to a property management company. For 13 years, someone had been collecting monthly rent on the property, using that rental income to pay the minimum monthly mortgage payment while pocketing whatever was left over. I didn't need to guess who that someone was, but the $300,000 from 13 years ago wasn't the end of it. It was just the foundation. I kept scrolling up the timeline, moving closer to the present day. 4 years ago, a second lien was recorded. A home equity line of credit, HELOC, for $50,000. 2 years ago, an increase on the HELOC to $75,000. I opened a blank Excel spreadsheet. My paralegal training took over, overriding the daughter who was currently bleeding out on the inside. I created 2 columns, date of loan withdrawal and Delilah's life events. I didn't need Instagram to remember my sister's timeline. She made sure to shove her milestones in my face at every family gathering. 4 years ago, the $50,000 HELOC was approved. That exact same month, a 22-year-old Delilah, who was working a part-time retail job at the time, somehow saved up enough to buy a brand new Range Rover in cash, claiming she was a master at budgeting. 2 years ago, the HELOC limit was raised by $25,000. 3 weeks later, Delilah quit her retail job to become a full-time influencer, funding a month-long trip to Paris and Milan to build her aesthetic portfolio. My mother hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She had turned me into an invisible, infinite ATM machine to fund my sister's vanity. I looked back at the database. There was one final document filed just 8 days ago. It was a wire transfer authorization and a modification to the HELOC, maxing out the equity on the property. The withdrawal amount, $150,000. The exact amount Avery had whispered about in the kitchen last night. The escrow money for Delilah's new 5-bedroom farmhouse. I felt physically sick. The sheer audacity of it was suffocating. My mother was standing in her beautiful suburban kitchen, wearing cashmere, casually promising to siphon another $150,000 of my stolen equity to buy a house for her golden child, while looking me in the eye and telling my future brother-in-law that I just had bad luck with my finances. I pulled up the scanned PDF of the original $300,000 mortgage from 13 years ago. I scrolled down to the final page, the signature block. There it was, Sloan Bennett. I zoomed in on the signature until the pixels blurred. It was a very good forgery, but I look at signatures for a living. The pressure of the pen was wrong. The loop on the S was slightly too tight, lacking my natural fluidity. The cross on the T's at the end of Bennett slanted upward. It was my mother's handwriting, carefully disguised to mimic mine. But a forged signature alone isn't enough to secure a mortgage. You need a notary public. A state-commissioned official who verifies the identity of the person signing the document, checking their driver's license, and physically witnessing the signature to prevent exactly this kind of fraud. I dragged my mouse over to the notary acknowledgement section at the bottom of the page. There was a blue stamp, State of State, Notary Public, Commission Number 8849201. Expiration date, October 14th, 2018. Name, Richard T. Vance. I stopped breathing. Vance. As in Sterling and Vance, my firm. Richard Vance was the founding partner of this law firm. He had passed away 7 years ago, but 13 years ago, he was still practicing. Avery had somehow gotten a document notarized by the head of the very firm I now worked for. That was impossible. My mother didn't know Richard Vance. I opened a new tab, logging into the Secretary of State's Notary Commission verification portal. I typed in the commission number, 8849201. The record popped up. The number did indeed belong to Richard T. Vance. But then I looked at the signature of the notary on the forged mortgage document. It was a messy, illegible scrawl. I opened our firm's internal archive. I pulled up an old legitimate contract signed and notarized by Richard Vance from that same year. I put the two documents side by side on my monitors. They didn't match, not even close. Richard Vance had a distinct, elegant, old-school cursive signature. The signature on my forged mortgage looked like it had been scribbled by someone rushing through a grocery store checkout. The horrifying puzzle pieces clicked into place. My mother hadn't bribed a notary. She had gone online, found the publicly available notary commission number of a prominent local attorney, and ordered a custom counterfeit rubber stamp from some shady website. She had stamped the documents herself, forged the notary's signature, and mailed the package to the online lender. This escalated the situation from a domestic family dispute to a multi-layered federal crime. As a real estate paralegal, my brain automatically categorized the offenses. Identity theft, using my SSN and forging my signature. Wire fraud, transmitting fraudulent loan documents across state lines to the lender. Bank fraud, defrauding a financial institution of $300,000. Forgery of a public seal, falsifying a state notary stamp. If a federal prosecutor saw this file, Avery wouldn't just get a slap on the wrist. She would be facing 20 years in federal prison. I leaned back in my chair. The sun was fully up now, casting harsh, unforgiving light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the office. The morning staff was starting to trickle in. I could hear the distant ding of the elevator and the muffled chatter of the junior associates. I sat there, surrounded by the silence of my own shattered reality. For 13 years, I had hated myself. I had internalized the shame of my ruined credit. I had accepted the condescension from Delilah and the silent judgment from my father. I had worn cheap clothes, lived in awful apartments, and eaten terrible food, all because I thought I was paying the price for a familial sacrifice. I hadn't sacrificed anything. I had been harvested. I highlighted the entire Excel spreadsheet, the row upon row of fraudulent loans matched with Delilah's luxury purchases. I hit print. I printed the forged deed of trust. I printed the fake notary stamp. I printed the public property tax records proving they had been paying the taxes from a shell bank account to keep me from getting the bills in the mail. I walked over to the heavy-duty legal printer in the copy room and watched as the pages slid out, warm to the touch. 50 pages of undeniable, empirical proof that my mother was a sociopathic criminal. I took the pages back to my desk, 3-hole punched them, and placed them into a thick, black legal binder. I closed the cover and rested my hands on top of it. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. My phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a text message from my mother. "Morning, sweetie. Delilah is having a minor meltdown about her bridal shower dress. I'm taking her to the boutique on 5th Avenue during your lunch break. You should come. It would mean so much to her to have her big sister there to support her. Love you. XOXO." I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer psychological manipulation of it was breathtaking. She had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from me, ruined my financial future, and now she wanted me to stand in a luxury bridal boutique and clap while she spent my stolen equity on a dress for the sister who mocked me. Before today, I would have made an excuse. I would have felt guilty for not being a supportive sister. I would have apologized. I unlocked my phone. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. The forensic paralegal inside me, cold, meticulous, and ruthlessly objective, took the wheel. I didn't type an angry paragraph. I didn't confront her. You don't show the enemy your hand when you're still building the case. I typed a single word. Sure. I hit send, slipped the phone into my pocket, and opened the binder again. Delilah wanted her perfect wedding. Avery wanted her perfect, wealthy family facade. They were about to enter the escrow phase on a $600,000 house, a process so delicate that a single financial discrepancy could blow the entire transaction apart. They didn't realize it yet, but they had built their entire castle of glass on top of a landmine, and I was the only one holding the detonator. Please let me know when you are ready for part 3. The bridal boutique on Fifth Avenue smelled of vanilla orchids and money. It was the kind of establishment where there were no price tags on the gowns. If you had to ask, you didn't belong there. I arrived exactly at 12:30 p.m., wearing my sensible trench coat over my firm-issued business attire. The contrast between my muted, practical existence and the explosion of ivory tulle and silk organza in the showroom was almost comical. My mother and sister were already there, seated on a plush velvet sofa in a private viewing suite. A stylist in a sleek black dress was pouring them champagne. "Sloan, you made it," Avery called out, her voice echoing off the mirrored walls. She looked thrilled, playing the role of the generous, loving mother to absolute perfection. "Come sit. Delilah is about to try on the frontrunner." "I can only stay for 45 minutes, I said, taking a seat on the edge of a matching armchair. I declined the champagne. "We have a massive commercial closing at the firm today." "Always working," Delilah sighed from behind a heavy silk curtain. "You really need to learn how to balance your chakras, Sloan. Life isn't just about reviewing contracts." I kept my face perfectly neutral. I'll keep that in mind. The curtain pulled back. Delilah stepped out. It was a custom designer gown, intricate French lace, a plunging neckline, and a train that pooled around her like spilled milk. She looked beautiful. She looked like $1,000,000. Or more accurately, she looked like my stolen home equity. "Oh, Delilah," Avery gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Real tears sprang to her eyes. "You look absolutely breathtaking." Delilah spun, admiring herself in the three-way mirror. "It's the one. I know it's the one. But Mom, it's $14,500, plus alterations." Wyatt's mother was hinting that she thought I should wear her vintage dress, but I refused to look like a dusty antique. "Don't you worry about the price, sweetheart," Avery said, waving her hand dismissively. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sleek, heavy platinum credit card. I recognized the logo. It was the bank that held the fraudulent home equity line of credit on my grandmother's house. "This is your special day. We are doing it right." I watched my mother hand the card to the stylist. I watched the stylist walk over to the discreet payment terminal on a glass desk. I watched the card slide into the chip reader. Beep. Approved. In a fraction of a second, $14,500 of my money leveraged against the property I legally owned, money I was secretly paying the interest on through the rental income my mother was stealing, was converted into a dress my sister would wear for 6 hours. "Thank you, Mommy," Delilah squealed, rushing over to hug her. "Anything for my girls," Avery said, catching my eye over Delilah's shoulder and giving me a warm maternal wink. The psychological dissonance was dizzying. If I had been the weak, guilt-ridden daughter I was yesterday, I would have felt a twinge of inadequacy for not being able to contribute to my sister's wedding. But the paralegal sitting in that velvet chair saw a completely different scene. I saw a wire fraud transaction occurring in real time. "I have to get back to the office," I said, standing up abruptly. The air in the boutique was suddenly too thin. "The dress is beautiful, Delilah. Congratulations." "Thanks for popping in," Delilah said, already distracted by the stylist bringing out veils. "Drive safe, sweetie," Avery called after me. I didn't drive back to the firm. I got into my Civic, locked the doors, and drove straight to the suburbs. I knew my father's schedule. Logan wouldn't be home from his logistics firm until 6 p.m. Avery and Delilah had a floral consultation after the dress fitting, followed by a cake tasting. The house would be empty for at least 3 hours. I parked a block away and walked to my childhood home. I punched the 4-digit code into the garage keypad my father's birth year, and the heavy door rumbled open. I stepped inside, the familiar smell of motor oil and my mother's expensive laundry detergent washing over me. I went straight upstairs to my parents' master bedroom. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but financial criminals are creatures of habit. They need ledgers, they need physical tools. They don't throw away the mechanisms of their fraud because they always think they might need them again. I started in my father's home office, but quickly realized it was useless. Logan's desk was filled with golf magazines and old tax returns. He was an accessory to this, perhaps willfully ignorant, but he wasn't the architect. Avery was the architect. I moved to her walk-in closet. It was meticulously organized by color and season. I checked the top shelves behind the hat boxes. Nothing. I checked under the floorboards. Nothing. Then I looked at her jewelry vanity. It was a heavy, antique wooden piece with a large mirror and several small drawers. I opened them one by one. Earrings, necklaces, watches. But the bottom right drawer wouldn't open. It was locked. I went down to the kitchen, grabbed a thin flathead screwdriver from the utility drawer, and went back upstairs. I wedged the metal tip into the cheap brass lock of the vanity drawer and twisted hard. The wood splintered with a sharp crack and the drawer popped open. Inside was a heavy, fireproof metal lockbox. It had a combination lock. I thought for a moment. Avery was arrogant, but she wasn't imaginative. I rolled the dials to Delilah's birthday. Click. The lid sprang open. I stood there, staring down into the dark metal belly of the box, feeling the last remaining threads of my childhood illusion snap and dissolve into dust. Inside lay a stack of checkbooks. I pulled the top one out. The name printed in the corner was Sloan Bennett. The address was a P.O. box I had never seen before. The account number matched the HELOC from my morning database search. Beneath the checkbooks was a thick leather-bound ledger. I opened it. In my mother's neat, cursive handwriting was a meticulous accounting of 13 years of theft. It was categorized by year. She had tracked the rental income from my grandmother's house, subtracted the monthly mortgage payment she was making to keep the loan out of default, and highlighted the net profit. Next to the profit margins were notes on where the money went. Delilah's braces, Delilah's college tuition, Range Rover down payment, kitchen remodel. I was a line item in my mother's budget, a revenue stream, but the final item in the box was the most damning. It was wrapped in a small piece of velvet cloth. I peeled the fabric back. It was a self-inking rubber stamp. I grabbed a piece of blank stationery from the vanity top and pressed the stamp down firmly. State of State Notary, Public Commission number 884-9201, Richard T. Vance. I traced the blue ink with my index finger. This was it, the murder weapon. This little piece of rubber had killed my 20s, murdered my financial independence, and assassinated my credit score. "What are you doing in here?" The voice was sharp, cutting through the silence of the room like a whip. I turned around. Avery was standing in the doorway of the bedroom. She had come home early. Her designer handbag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the carpet with a soft thud. Her eyes darted from the splintered vanity drawer to the open lockbox, and finally to the piece of paper in my hand with the blue notary stamp. For a terrifying second, the silence stretched so tight I thought it would shatter the windows. I didn't panic. The adrenaline pumping through my veins was cold and clinical. I picked up the counterfeit stamp and the leather ledger, stepped away from the vanity, and walked past her without saying a word. "Sloan!" she snapped, spinning around to follow me down the stairs. "Sloan, stop right there! What do you think you're doing breaking into my things?" I walked into the kitchen and dropped the ledger and the stamp onto the marble island. They landed with a heavy, final thud. Then I unzipped my tote bag, pulled out the thick black binder I had printed at the firm, and slammed it down next to them. "I pulled the title records this morning," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I know about the $300,000 mortgage. I know about the HELOC. I know you never sold Grandma's house. I know you forged my signature. And now," I tapped the rubber stamp, "I know exactly how you faked the notary acknowledgement using my late boss's credentials." Avery stopped on the other side of the island. I waited for the tears. I waited for the same hysterical, weeping mother who had begged me to save the family 13 years ago. I expected her to collapse, to plead for forgiveness, to claim she was desperate. She didn't. I watched the transformation happen in real time. The warm, suburban matriarch vanished. Her face hardened, her posture straightened, and her eyes went completely flat. The mask fell off, revealing the chilling, calculating machinery underneath. She walked over to the island, picked up the counterfeit notary stamp, and casually tossed it into the trash can under the sink. "You're being dramatic," Avery said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her cardigan. "Dramatic?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You committed identity theft. You committed federal wire fraud. You stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from me to fund Delilah's lifestyle." "I managed an asset," she corrected me, her tone dripping with condescension. "Your grandmother was a foolish, spiteful woman to leave that house to an 18-year-old child. You had no idea how the world worked. Your father's business was struggling. We needed capital. I put that house to work for this family. You should be thanking me. Because of my financial management, this family maintained its standing." "You ruined my credit," I yelled, the forensic detachment finally slipping, raw anger bleeding through. "I was rejected for a roach-infested apartment last night because my score is 515. I have spent 13 years living in poverty, paying off the $45,000 in credit card debt you also opened in my name, while you buy Delilah $15,000 wedding dresses. Avery leaned against the marble counter, crossing her arms. She looked at me not with guilt, but with profound disappointment. You always were so selfish, Sloan, she sighed, always counting pennies, always resenting your sister just because she knows how to attract success. Delilah has an image to maintain. Her fiancé's family expects a certain caliber of people. If we look poor, Wyatt's parents will force him to sign an ironclad prenup or worse, cancel the wedding. That house, that equity, is an investment in Delilah's future. Once she marries Wyatt, she'll be set for life. She'll take care of all of us. She's buying a $600,000 house using an escrow account funded by my stolen equity, I stated, locking eyes with her, and I am going to the police. I'm taking this binder to the FBI field office. Avery didn't flinch. She actually smiled. It was a small, razor-thin smile that made my stomach churn. No, you're not, she said softly. Watch me. I reached for the binder. Avery's hand shot out, clamping down on the black cover before I could pull it away. Her grip was startlingly strong. Think about this, Sloan. Use that legal brain of yours, she whispered, leaning across the island until her face was inches from mine. You are a senior real estate paralegal at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. Your entire career is built on compliance, ethics, and verifying the integrity of property titles. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the binder. What do you think the State Bar Association will do when they find out a paralegal has her name on a massive, fraudulent mortgage document? A document notarized by the forged stamp of the founder of her own firm? I am the victim, I shot back. I didn't sign it. Who will believe you? Avery countered, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. The house was in your name. The loan is in your name. You've been paying off the other credit cards for 13 years, which establishes a pattern of accepting the debt. To an outside investigator, it looks like you orchestrated the whole thing. You used your insider knowledge at the law firm to steal Richard Vance's notary number. You pulled the strings. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Legally, I knew I could prove my innocence with handwriting analysis and IP tracking for the loan origination. But professionally, she was hitting my only vulnerability. If the police investigate this, Avery continued, sensing my hesitation and driving the knife deeper, Sterling and Vance will fire you immediately to protect their reputation. No law firm will ever hire you again. You'll lose your license. You'll be uninsurable. You're already living in a dump. Do you want to be homeless too? She let go of the binder and took a step back, her eyes gleaming with dark triumph. You are going to walk out that door, Avery commanded, her tone absolute. You are going to go back to your little office. You are going to smile at your sister's wedding, and you are going to keep your mouth shut until escrow closes on Delilah's house. If you do that, I'll start paying down the HELOC. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will go down, Sloan, but I swear to God I will drag you to the bottom of the ocean with me. I stood frozen in my childhood kitchen. This was Climax 1. This was the moment of absolute psychological destruction. The realization that my mother didn't just steal from me, she hated me. She viewed me as a shield to be discarded, a resource to be mined, and a threat to be neutralized. She thought she had won. She thought she had found the perfect leverage. She assumed that my fear of losing my career would paralyze me, just like my fear of my father going to jail had paralyzed me at 18. But Avery made a critical miscalculation. 13 years ago, I was an uneducated teenager acting out of love. Today, I was a 31-year-old forensic paralegal operating out of sheer, unadulterated rage. I looked at my mother. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply reached out, picked up my black binder, and zipped it into my tote bag. Okay, I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. Avery looked slightly taken aback by my sudden capitulation, but she quickly masked it with a smug nod. Good girl. I knew you'd see reason. I turned on my heel and walked out of the house. I got back into my Civic. I didn't turn the key in the ignition right away. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the suburban facade of the Bennett residence. My mother thought I was trapped by the law. She thought the legal system was a blunt instrument that would crush me as collateral damage. She didn't understand that the law is not a hammer. In the right hands, it is a scalpel. She wanted me to stay quiet until Delilah's house closed escrow. She thought the escrow account was her safe harbor. She had no idea that she had just given me the exact blueprint on how to destroy her. I wasn't going to report her to the police today. I was going to wait. I was going to let her wire that $150,000 into the escrow account. I was going to let Delilah stand in her $14,500 dress. I was going to wait until the trap was perfectly primed, and then I was going to burn their entire world to the ground. I started the engine and drove back to the city. I had a meeting to schedule. Not with my boss, but with a man named Harrison Reed. He was a ruthless independent attorney who specialized in exactly one thing: dismantling financial predators. And I was about to become his best client. Harrison Reed did not have a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. His practice was located on the second floor of a converted brick warehouse in the industrial district, sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a commercial printing shop. The frosted glass door simply read, H. Reed, Escrine, Financial Forensics and Litigation. I walked in at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday. The waiting room was empty, devoid of the glossy legal magazines and plush leather sofas I was accustomed to at Sterling & Vance. Instead, there were 2 mismatched waiting chairs and a receptionist's desk piled high with manila folders. "Sloan Bennett?" a voice called out from an open doorway in the back. "Yes," I said, walking toward the office. Harrison Reed was in his late 40s, wearing a tailored but slightly rumpled navy suit, with his tie loosened and the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked like a man who spent his days wading through other people's financial sewage. He pointed to a chair across from his desk, which was completely obscured by stacks of paper, a half-empty mug of black coffee, and a dual monitor setup. "Janine at the title company said you were the best paralegal she's ever worked with," Reed said, leaning back in his chair and assessing me with sharp, dark eyes. "She said if Sloan Bennett calls asking for a referral for an independent litigator, I should clear my schedule. So my schedule is clear. What are we looking at?" I didn't offer a polite preamble. I unzipped my tote bag, pulled out the thick black binder, and slid it across the chaotic surface of his desk. "Identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and forgery of a public seal," I stated flatly. "The perpetrator is my mother, Avery Bennett. The primary beneficiary is my sister, Delilah Bennett. The victim is me. And the compromised notary seal belongs to Richard T. Vance." Harrison's eyebrows shot up. He pulled the binder toward him, flipped it open, and began to read. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the hum of the air conditioner and the crisp turn of pages. I watched him absorb 13 years of my financial crucifixion. He didn't skim. He read the loan origination dates, checked the forged signatures, scrutinized the fake notary stamp, and cross-referenced my Excel spreadsheet tracking the withdrawals against my sister's luxury purchases. When he reached the end, he closed the binder and let out a long, slow whistle. "Your mother has a pair of brass ones, I'll give her that," Harrison said, tapping a pen against the black cover. "This is a meticulously structured fraud. She used the rental income to service the minimum debt payments so the loans never defaulted and triggered a foreclosure notice to your actual address. She kept the accounts just healthy enough to fly under the radar of the fraud departments, but fully leveraged to extract maximum cash." "She confronted me yesterday," I said, my voice steady. "I found her lockbox. I saw the counterfeit notary stamp and the physical ledger. I threatened to go to the police, and she countered. She said if I blow the whistle, the optics will look like an insider job. I'm a real estate paralegal with the victimized property in my name, and the forged stamp belongs to the founder of my firm. She said she'd drag my career down with her." Harrison stopped tapping the pen. His eyes locked onto mine, shedding any casual demeanor. "She's not entirely wrong," he said bluntly. "If you walk into a police precinct today with this binder, a lazy detective will look at your job title, look at the mortgage in your name, and assume you were the mastermind who threw your mother under the bus when the walls started closing in. At the very least, Sterling & Vance will put you on unpaid administrative leave pending a federal investigation. In this industry, an accusation of title fraud is a death sentence for your career, even if you are ultimately cleared." My stomach tightened, but I didn't flinch. "So, how do we circumvent her leverage? How do I destroy her without catching the shrapnel?" Harrison smiled. It was a predatory, deeply satisfied smile. "We don't go to the police. Not yet," he said, leaning forward. "We go to the money. Your mother thinks the law is a club. We are going to use it as a scalpel. You mentioned she's wiring $150,000 into an escrow account for your sister's new house?" "Yes. A $600,000 property. They enter the final closing stages next week." "Perfect," Harrison said, pulling a legal pad toward him and scribbling rapidly. "Fraudsters like your mother operate on the illusion of legitimacy. They need the banking system to process their stolen funds. If we disrupt the escrow, we trigger an institutional collapse. Banks don't care about family drama, Sloan, but they care very, very much about federal anti-money laundering regulations. He looked up at me, his pen hovering over the paper. Here is the strategy. We need absolute, undeniable proof of execution. The documents in this binder show that fraud occurred, but to immunize you completely, we need to prove that Avery Bennett was the one sitting at the keyboard, pushing the buttons and forging the documents. We need the digital footprint, IPs, email chains, internal communications. If we have that, I can file a massive civil RICO suit against her, draft an airtight package for the FBI White Collar Division, and file a lis pendens, a formal notice of pending litigation, directly onto the title of your grandmother's house. And the escrow? I asked. Once the lis pendens is filed, the title of your grandmother's house becomes clouded. Any funds derived from the equity of that house become radioactive, Harrison explained, his voice dropping into a low, tactical cadence. I will personally contact the title company and the mortgage lender underwriting your sister's new house. I will inform them with documented proof that the $150,000 sitting in their escrow account is the direct proceed of wire fraud and identity theft. The bank will panic. They will freeze the escrow account immediately. The closing will fail, the seller will pull out, and your sister's perfect little house of cards will implode in real time. I felt a dark, cold thrill radiate outward from my chest. It was the exact counterstrike I had envisioned, formalized by a legal expert. But everything hinges on getting that digital proof, Harrison warned, breaking my reverie. I need you to get into your mother's digital infrastructure. You have to play the submissive, terrified daughter. Make her believe her threat worked. Get inside that house, get on her computer, and find me the smoking gun. I can do that, I said without hesitation. Be careful, Sloan, Harrison added, his tone softening just a fraction. People who are capable of doing this to their own children are not just greedy. They are sociopathic. If she realizes what you're doing before we spring the trap, she will destroy the evidence. I stood up, adjusting the strap of my tote bag on my shoulder. She won't realize a thing. She thinks I'm a coward. The following Sunday, I drove back to the suburbs. The Bennett household was in a state of chaotic, manufactured joy. Delilah's wedding was less than a month away, and the dining room table had been converted into an assembly line for the wedding invitations. They were ridiculously lavish, heavy cardstock, embossed gold foil, and wax seals. I walked through the front door carrying a tray of iced coffees I had bought as a peace offering. Avery was standing at the head of the table organizing a stack of RSVP envelopes. When she saw me, she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed my demeanor. I intentionally slumped my shoulders, keeping my gaze lowered, projecting the exact image of the defeated, trapped daughter she expected to see. I brought coffee, I said quietly, setting the tray on the side table. Oh, Sloan, how thoughtful, Avery said, her voice instantly melting back into the sugary, maternal tone she reserved for her suburban audience. She walked over and gave me a brief, one-armed hug. I forced myself not to stiffen. I knew you'd come around, sweetie. Family is the most important thing. We have to stick together. Delilah didn't even look up from her phone. She was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through Pinterest. Did you get my order right this time? Last time you forgot the oat milk. It's oat milk, I said, walking over to the table and taking a seat. What do you need me to do? For the next 2 hours, I sat in the dining room, folding heavy parchment paper and dripping hot gold wax onto envelopes. I listened to Delilah complain about the florist, and I listened to Avery assure her that everything would be handled. My father, Logan, was predictably absent, supposedly out playing a round of golf with Wyatt's father. Around 3 p.m., I put down my wax stamp and rubbed my temples. I'm going to use the restroom, I announced, standing up. And then I might lie down in the guest room for a few minutes. I have a migraine. Poor thing, Avery murmured, not looking up from her calligraphy pen. Take some Advil. It's in the master bath. I walked down the hallway, my heart rate accelerating. I didn't go to the restroom. I bypassed the guest room and slipped silently into my father's home office at the back of the house. The room smelled of old wood and stale cologne. On the mahogany desk sat the family computer, a bulky iMac that Logan used for checking sports scores and Avery used for household budgeting. I locked the office door as quietly as possible and sat down at the desk. I jiggled the mouse. The screen woke up, displaying the password prompt. I knew my father's passwords. They were always a variation of his golf handicap and the year he graduated high school. But I wasn't trying to access Logan's profile. I needed Avery's. I clicked on her user icon. Password. I tried Delilah's birth date. Incorrect. I tried her anniversary. Incorrect. I tried the name of the street we lived on. Incorrect. Panic fluttered in my chest. If I couldn't get in, Harrison couldn't file the RISO suit and the escrow trap would fall apart. I closed my eyes and thought about my mother. Who was she? At her core, she was vain. She was obsessed with status. She believed she was the savior of this family. I typed, Matriarch 1. The screen shook. Incorrect. I looked around the room, desperate for a clue. My eyes landed on a framed photograph on the bookshelf. It was a picture of our family on a vacation in Hawaii, taken right after the HELOC was approved 4 years ago. Avery was wearing a stunning, expensive white dress, smiling triumphantly at the camera. At the bottom of the frame, engraved in a small brass plate, was a quote she loved to repeat to her friends. Blessed and highly favored. I turned back to the keyboard. I typed, highly favored $. The screen blinked, the progress wheel spun, and the desktop opened. I let out a slow, shaking breath and immediately went to work. I plugged a small, high-capacity USB drive into the back of the monitor. I opened her local document folders. Most of it was garbage, recipes, PTA meeting notes, interior design mood boards. But then I found a folder simply labeled Taxes. I opened it. Inside were subfolders organized by year. I clicked on the one from 13 years ago. There, sitting in plain sight, was a PDF titled E_appraisal_final. It was the appraisal report for my grandmother's house. Next to it was a Word document titled Vance_notary_template. I opened it. It was a scanned image of Richard Vance's actual signature, taken from a public court filing, which she had clearly used to order the counterfeit rubber stamp. Gotcha. I dragged the entire taxes folder onto my USB drive. It was gigabytes of data, a complete digital footprint of the fraud, proving the documents were created, modified, and stored on this specific machine under her specific user profile. While the files were copying, I opened her email application. I needed to see if there were any communications with the offshore bank or the property management company. I clicked on the search bar and typed the address of my grandmother's house. Dozens of emails populated. Most were automated receipts for property tax payments and correspondence with the property manager regarding roof repairs and plumbing issues. But one email thread caught my eye. It wasn't from the bank. It was from an email address I knew intimately. DelilahB_official@gmail.com. The date on the email was exactly 4 years ago. The exact month the $50,000 HELOC was taken out, and the exact month Delilah bought her Range Rover in cash. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. Delilah was 22 at the time. My mother had always maintained that she kept the financial management to herself, protecting her daughters from the dirty work. Why was Delilah emailing about the property? I clicked on the thread and scrolled to the very bottom to read the initial message. From DelilahB_official@gmail.com to Avery Bennett_home@gmail.com, date October 14th, 2022, subject, the car dealership. Mom, I'm at the Land Rover dealership. The sales guy is being a total prick. He ran my credit and said I don't have enough history to qualify for the financing on the autobiography edition, even with the $10,000 down payment from my savings. I told him my family is wealthy, but he won't budge without a cosigner with a 750 plus score. Dad won't do it because he's terrified of his own shadow. We need to use the grandma fund. How fast can you pull the equity? My blood ran cold. The grandma fund. That was what they called my stolen inheritance. And Delilah knew about it. She didn't just know about it. She felt entitled to it. I read my mother's reply. From Avery Bennett_home@gmail.com to DelilahB_official@gmail.com, date October 14th, 2022. Don't panic, darling. These salesmen are just bullies. I'll initiate a HELOC draw on Sloan's property tomorrow morning. It usually takes 48 hours for the wire to clear into the joint account. Just tell the dealer you are paying in cash and you need a few days to transfer the funds from your investment portfolio. We'll get you that car. XOXO, I sat frozen, staring at the screen. The betrayal was no longer a single, jagged knife in my back. It was a barrage of blades. For years, I had assumed Delilah was just a spoiled, ignorant beneficiary of our mother's crimes. I thought she was vain and vapid, but fundamentally innocent of the mechanics of the theft. I was wrong. She was an active co-conspirator. My hand shook as I scrolled up to the next email in the chain, dated 2 days later, from DelilahB_official@gmail.com to Avery Bennett _home at gmail.com. Date October 16th, 2022. The bank needs Sloane's physical signature on the HELOC authorization form since she's the primary on the title. You said you were going to sign it, but the bank rep is coming to the house tomorrow to pick up the paperwork while you're at the salon. I can't wait until next week. The dealer is going to sell the car to someone else. What do I do? The final email in the thread from my mother contained an attachment. From Avery Bennett _home at gmail.com to Delilah B _official at gmail.com. Date October 16th, 2022. Attachment. Sloane _sig _reference .jpg. Calm down, Delilah. It's not that hard. I attached a scan of a check Sloane wrote to us last year. Look at how she loops her S and crosses her T's. Print out the bank form tonight, lock your bedroom door, and practice on a piece of scrap paper until you get it right. It doesn't have to be perfect, just close enough. The bank reps barely look at it anyway. Make sure you use a blue ballpoint pen, not a gel pen. Get it done. I clicked on the attachment. It was a high-resolution scan of my signature. I minimized the email and clicked on a folder on the desktop named Scans. I scrolled through the thumbnails. There, buried among appliance warranties and takeout menus, was a scanned PDF titled Practice. I opened it. It was a lined piece of notebook paper. On it, my name, Sloane Bennett, was written 30 times. The first few signatures at the top of the page were sloppy, hesitant, completely lacking my natural rhythm. But as my eyes traced down the page, the handwriting evolved. The loops grew tighter. The slant became identical to my own. By the bottom of the page, the signature was a flawless, terrifying forgery. It was Delilah's handwriting, slowly and methodically mutating into mine. My own sister. The girl I had shared a bathroom with. The girl who had just spent the last 2 hours sitting across from me, sipping an iced coffee I bought her, complaining about the floral arrangements for a wedding being funded by the very fraud she had helped execute. She had sat in her childhood bedroom, gripping a blue ballpoint pen, and practiced stealing my identity just so she could buy a luxury SUV. She had forged my name to plunge me $50,000 deeper into debt, all while looking me in the eye at every Thanksgiving and making passive-aggressive comments about my lack of financial literacy. This was climax 2 of my internal world. The last shred of empathy, the final lingering instinct of sisterly protection, evaporated into thin air. There was no toxic mother and innocent golden child dynamic here. There was only a criminal syndicate operating under the guise of a loving suburban family, and I was the resource they were mining. I highlighted the entire email thread. I highlighted the practice sheet. I dragged them onto the USB drive. Copying 100%. I safely ejected the drive, pulled it from the back of the iMac, and slipped it into the front pocket of my slacks. I closed the email application, shut down the folders, and put the computer to sleep. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me in the dark office. I looked different. The exhaustion that usually weighed down my features was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I unlocked the office door and walked back down the hallway. The dining room was still buzzing with activity. "Feeling any better, sweetie?" Avery asked, glancing up as I walked into the room. I looked at my mother. I looked at Delilah, who was now holding up a gold wax seal to the light, admiring her own reflection in it. "Much better," I said, my voice completely smooth, stripped of any forced submission. "The migraine is completely gone." "Good," Delilah said, tossing the seal back onto the table. "Because we have like 200 more of these to do, and my wrist is killing me." "I'm actually going to head out," I said, picking up my tote bag. "I remembered I have some important paperwork I need to drop off for a client." Avery's smile faltered slightly, her eyes searching my face for any sign of rebellion. Finding none, she relaxed. "On a Sunday? You really work too hard, Sloane, but drive safe." "I will," I said. I walked out the front door, got into my car, and pulled away from the curb. I didn't drive toward my apartment. I drove straight back toward the industrial district. I pulled my phone from my purse, connected it to the car's Bluetooth, and hit speed dial. Harrison Reed answered on the second ring. "Tell me you have something, Bennett." "I have the digital footprint," I said, the engine of the Civic roaring as I merged onto the highway. "I have the IP addresses, the forged document templates, and the internal correspondence." "Excellent. I'll start drafting the list pendants tonight." "Harrison," I interrupted, my grip on the steering wheel bone white. "I found something else. It wasn't just my mother. Delilah is a co-conspirator. I have emails detailing her actively forging my signature on the HELOC withdrawal to buy her car. She knew everything. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When Harrison spoke again, his voice lacked its usual cynical edge. It was deadly serious. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked. "Because if we bring Delilah into the RICO suit, she goes down just as hard as Avery. The collateral damage to her life will be total. Her fiancé, her in-laws, her public persona, all of it will burn." I thought about the rejection email for the cheap apartment. I thought about the Sharpie I used to color in my shoes. I thought about 13 years of eating ramen noodles while my sister drove a Range Rover bought with my blood. "Burn it," I said. "Burn all of it." "All right," Harrison replied, the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. "Consider the match struck. When is the exact closing date for Delilah's escrow?" "Next Friday at 10 a.m. "Perfect. I will file the injunction and notify the title company on Friday at 9 a.m. They won't even know what hit them until the money freezes in the pipes." I hung up the phone. The sun was beginning to set over the city, casting long golden shadows across the highway. For the first time in 13 years, I didn't feel the crushing weight of the debt pressing down on my chest. I felt light. I felt dangerous. The Bennetts were about to learn a very hard lesson about real estate law. You can never truly build a home on stolen ground. In the real estate industry, escrow is essentially a financial purgatory. When you buy a house, you don't just hand a briefcase of cash to the seller. The funds, your down payment, the bank's mortgage loan, go into a neutral third-party trust account called escrow. The money sits there, suspended in a delicate state of limbo, while the title company does its due diligence. They check for liens, they verify identities, and they ensure the money is clean. Only when every single piece of paper is perfectly aligned does the title company issue an insurance policy. The escrow officer releases the funds and the keys change hands. It is a system built entirely on trust and verified documentation. If you introduce a single drop of poison into that well, say a credible allegation of federal wire fraud, the entire ecosystem shuts down instantly. Banks are terrified of the federal government. They will not touch a transaction if there is even a shadow of money laundering involved. Avery and Delilah didn't know this. They thought money was just money. Once it was in the account, they assumed they were safe. They had no idea what was coming. The week leading up to the rehearsal dinner was a masterclass in psychological endurance. I went to work, I drafted contracts, I answered my mother's texts about flower arrangements with cheerful emojis. I watched Delilah post Instagram stories about the stress of closing on a multi-million-dollar property while sipping artisanal lattes. Behind the scenes, Harrison Reed was moving with lethal precision. On Wednesday afternoon, 24 hours before the rehearsal dinner, Harrison filed the lis pendens, a formal notice of pending legal action against the title of my grandmother's house. This legally clouded the property, acting as a giant red flag to anyone looking at the public records. But Harrison didn't stop there. Using the digital footprint I had pulled from my mother's iMac, he drafted a devastatingly comprehensive legal package. He didn't send it to the police. He sent it to the compliance officer of the bank underwriting Delilah and Wyatt's $600,000 mortgage and to the senior counsel of the title company holding their escrow account. The cover letter was a masterpiece of legal threat. It stated, with attached IP logs, forged signatures, and internal emails, that the $150,000 cash deposit wired into their escrow account by Avery Bennett was the direct proceed of identity theft and federal bank fraud. Harrison reminded the institutions of their obligations under the Patriot Act and federal anti-money laundering, AML, statutes. He didn't ask them to cancel the closing. He just presented the radioactive facts and let the bank's own risk aversion do the rest. Thursday evening arrived. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Sterling family's private country club, a sprawling estate with manicured golf courses and valet parking. The contrast between Wyatt's old money pedigree and my family's fabricated wealth was stark. I wore a simple navy sheath dress I had bought on sale. Avery, however, was dressed like she was attending a royal coronation. She wore a tailored Chanel suit, her neck dripping with pearls that I strongly suspected were purchased on one of my stolen credit cards. Logan trailed behind her, looking uncomfortable in a stiff tuxedo. Delilah was the center of attention, wearing a white silk cocktail dress, holding court among Wyatt's wealthy cousins and aunts. We were seated in a private dining room with crystal chandeliers and heavy velvet drapes. There were about 40 guests. The atmosphere was thick with the clinking of expensive champagne flutes and the hum of privileged conversation. I took my seat at the far end of the head table, quietly sipping sparkling water. I checked my watch. 7:15 p.m. According to the timeline Delilah had bragged about earlier that week, their real estate broker and the title company were scheduled to do the final funding review at 5 p.m. today, ensuring everything was clear for the official signing at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Right now, in some sterile office downtown, a compliance officer was reading Harrison's email. "To the beautiful couple," Arthur Sterling, Wyatt's father, announced, standing up and tapping his glass with a silver spoon. The room quieted down. When Wyatt first brought Delilah home, Beatrice and I were struck by her ambition. In our world, it's easy to rely on family money, but Delilah is building her own empire. She's an independent, self-made woman, and we are thrilled to welcome her into the Sterling family. Delilah beamed, leaning her head on Wyatt's shoulder. Avery dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin, playing the proud mother flawlessly. "And to Avery and Logan," Arthur continued, raising his glass toward my parents. "Thank you for raising such a remarkable young woman. We look forward to officially joining our families tomorrow." "Hear, hear," the room echoed. I raised my water glass. The irony was so rich it was practically choking me. Self-made. It was a brilliant piece of branding, funded entirely by a 13-year long con against her own sister. Just as the waiters began clearing the salad plates to bring out the filet mignon, Wyatt's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Sorry," he murmured to Delilah. "It's Marcus, my real estate attorney. I told him not to call tonight unless the house caught on fire. I need to take this." Wyatt stood up and walked out into the private hallway. I set my fork down. The temperature in my veins dropped to absolute zero. The trap had sprung. Through the glass panes of the dining room doors, I could see Wyatt pacing in the hallway. At first, he looked merely annoyed. Then, he stopped pacing. His posture went entirely rigid. He pressed the phone closer to his ear, his face turning an alarming shade of pale. He began shaking his head, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in a gesture of pure panic. He stayed out there for 10 agonizing minutes. Inside the room, the conversation flowed on, oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated outside. Avery was busy telling Wyatt's mother about her philanthropic work in the suburbs. Delilah was taking a selfie with a glass of champagne. Finally, the dining room doors swung open. Wyatt walked back in. He didn't look at the guests, he didn't look at his parents, he walked straight to the head table, his eyes locked onto Delilah. He looked like a man who had just narrowly avoided stepping off a cliff. "Wyatt, babe, is everything okay?" Delilah asked, her smile faltering as she registered the expression on his face. "Did Marcus get the final clear to close?" The room slowly went quiet, the tension bleeding from Wyatt radiating outward and infecting the guests. Wyatt didn't sit down. He gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. "The escrow is frozen," Wyatt said. His voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden silence of the room, it carried like a gunshot. "What?" Delilah let out a nervous little laugh. "Frozen? What do you mean? Like a banking glitch? Just tell them to fix it tomorrow morning." "It's not a glitch, Delilah," Wyatt said, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rising fury. He turned his gaze toward Avery, who was sitting frozen, her fork halfway to her mouth. Marcus just got off a conference call with the title company and the bank's fraud division. They received a legal injunction, a lis pendens backed by a federal reporting package. Avery's fork clattered against her porcelain plate. The sound was deafening. Logan blinked, looking confused, completely out of his depth. "I don't understand," Wyatt's father, Arthur, interjected, standing up from his seat. "Wyatt, what is going on? We wired our half of the down payment on Monday. It was clean." "Our money is clean, Dad," Wyatt said, his voice cracking. He looked back at Delilah, his eyes filled with disgust. "The $150,000 that Avery wired into the account on Tuesday is flagged as the proceeds of a criminal enterprise." Whispers erupted around the room. Wyatt's mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Wyatt, that is a ridiculous accusation," Avery snapped, recovering her composure with terrifying speed. She stood up, her face flushed with indignation. "Who told you this? That money was pulled from my personal investment portfolio. This is a misunderstanding. I will call my wealth manager right now." "Stop lying," Wyatt shouted. It was the first time I had ever heard him raise his voice. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his phone, reading directly from the screen. Marcus forwarded me the summary of the injunction. The money wasn't from an investment portfolio. It was drawn from a home equity line of credit on a property located at 412 Elm Street. My grandmother's address. The title company pulled the records, Wyatt continued, his voice shaking with anger. That house doesn't belong to you, Avery. It belongs to Sloan. And according to the legal filing they received, the mortgage and the HELOC were taken out using forged signatures and a counterfeit notary stamp. You committed identity theft against your own daughter. You stole her equity and you tried to launder it through my house. Delilah stood up, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Wyatt, stop it. You're making a scene. This is insane. Sloan is a liar. She's always been jealous of me. I saw the emails, Delilah, Wyatt roared, cutting her off. The entire room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Marcus sent me the attachments, Wyatt said, his voice dropping into a register of absolute disgust. There is a 4-year-old email thread between you and your mother. You needed a cosigner for your Range Rover, and your mother sent you a scan of Sloan's signature and told you to practice it. And you did. There is a scanned PDF of you practicing your sister's signature to commit fraud. Delilah's face drained of all color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The influencer facade, the carefully curated image of the self-made girl boss, shattered into a million irreparable pieces on the country club floor. Wyatt stepped back, putting physical distance between himself and my sister. My family's money is currently sitting in a frozen escrow account, co-mingled with stolen funds, Wyatt said, addressing Arthur and Beatrice. The bank is launching a full internal investigation. The closing is canceled. The seller is pulling out of the contract. He looked back at Delilah, his eyes cold and hollow. And so am I. The wedding is off. No! Delilah shrieked, lunging forward to grab Wyatt's arm. Wyatt, please. It wasn't my idea. My mom told me to do it. I didn't know how serious it was. I swear. It was the ultimate betrayal among thieves. The moment the ship started sinking, the golden child didn't hesitate to throw the matriarch overboard. Avery looked at Delilah, genuine shock registering on her face for the first time. The control she had exerted over our family for 13 years was disintegrating in front of a room full of country club elites. Delilah, shut your mouth, Avery hissed, her polished country club persona entirely abandoned. She looked around the room like a cornered animal, her eyes finally landing on me. I hadn't moved. I was still sitting at the end of the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I wasn't smiling, but I wasn't crying either. I was just watching. You, Avery breathed, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. You did this. You went into my house and you stole my files. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I did to keep this family afloat. Avery, that is enough, Arthur Sterling bellowed. He signaled the waitstaff who were hovering awkwardly near the kitchen doors. Call security. I want these people out of my club immediately. Wyatt, please. Delilah was sobbing now, heavy, ugly tears ruining her expensive makeup. She fell to her knees on the floor, clutching at Wyatt's tuxedo pants. I love you. We can fix this. We don't need the money. We can just get married. Get off me, Wyatt said quietly. He pulled his leg away, leaving Delilah sobbing on the expensive rug. He turned his back on her and walked out of the room, followed closely by his parents, who looked at my mother as if she were carrying the plague. The room emptied rapidly. The guests, Wyatt's extended family and friends, scrambled to grab their coats and bags, desperate to escape the blast radius of our family's implosion. No one looked at us. No one said goodbye. Within 3 minutes, the grand dining room was empty, save for the 4 Bennetts. Logan was standing near the wall, his face buried in his hands, trembling. Delilah was a heap of white silk and ruined mascara on the floor, wailing uncontrollably. Avery stood frozen, surrounded by half-eaten filet mignons and abandoned champagne flutes. The realization of what had just happened was finally settling in. She hadn't just lost the house. She hadn't just lost the wealthy son-in-law. Because Harrison had formally submitted the evidence to the banks to freeze the escrow, the institutions were now legally obligated to file suspicious activity reports, SARs, with the federal government. The FBI wasn't a threat anymore. It was an inevitability. Avery slowly turned her head and looked at me. There was no leverage left to pull, no careers to threaten. Are you happy now? She whispered, her voice ragged. You destroyed your sister's life. I stood up from the table. I picked up my trench coat and slipped my arms into the sleeves. I looked at the woman who had stolen my youth, ruined my credit, and treated me like a disposable asset. I looked at the sister who had gleefully forged my name to buy a luxury car. I didn't destroy anything, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large, empty room. I just ran a title check. You destroyed yourselves. I didn't wait for a response. I turned my back on them, walked out of the country club, and stepped into the cool, crisp night air. The trap had snapped shut. The bones were broken. But there was still one piece of business left to attend to. Because a true foreclosure doesn't just take the house, it takes the foundation too. The fallout from the rehearsal dinner was swift and absolute. By Monday morning, Wyatt's family had completely severed all ties. The wedding was officially canceled, the vendors were notified, and the country club deposit was forfeited. Delilah's social media accounts, once a curated grid of bridal aesthetic and self-made motivational quotes, vanished overnight. She went completely dark. I went to work. I sat at my desk at Sterling & Vance, drank my black coffee, and reviewed title commitments. I felt a strange, hollow peace. The storm had finally broken, and for the first time in 13 years, I wasn't the one standing in the rain. On Wednesday, my phone buzzed with a text message. It wasn't from my mother or my sister. It was from Logan. Can we meet? Just the two of us. At the diner on 4th Street, 6 p.m. I stared at the screen. My father had been a ghost in my life for over a decade. He was the silent bystander, the man who buried his head in the sand while my mother systematically dismantled my future. I debated ignoring him, but the forensic paralegal in me knew that you never leave a loose end untied. I arrived at the diner at exactly 6 p.m. Logan was already there, sitting in a cracked vinyl booth near the back. He looked terrible. The confident, suburban patriarch who spent his weekends on the golf course was gone. His shoulders were slumped, his face was unshaven, and the skin around his eyes was a bruised, sleepless purple. I slid into the booth across from him. I didn't take off my trench coat. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice raspy. He stared down at his coffee mug, unable to meet my eyes. "Make it quick," I said. "I have a lot of work to do." He took a slow, rattling breath. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a standard blue bank envelope. He placed it on the sticky Formica table and slid it across to me. "What is this?" I asked, not touching it. "It's a cashier's check," Logan whispered, "for $50,000. Wait, I frowned, looking from the envelope to his defeated face. "Where did you get $50,000? I thought the family was practically destitute when I was 18. "I have a secret retirement fund," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the clatter of plates from the kitchen. "An old 401k from my first logistics firm that I never rolled over. Avery doesn't know about it. I've been sitting on it for emergencies." The math clicked into place, cold and sharp. "An emergency," I repeated. "Like when you supposedly owed money to bad people and the house was going to be foreclosed on 13 years ago?" Logan flinched as if I had struck him. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Take the money," he pleaded, finally looking up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and wet. "Take the $50,000. Pay off whatever is left of the credit cards. Use the rest to get a down payment on a nice condo. Just, please, call your lawyer. Tell him to drop the injunction. Tell him not to forward the files to the FBI." "You want me to drop the federal fraud case?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "It's Delilah," Logan begged, his voice cracking. "Wyatt left her. She's completely broken. And your mother, if the feds pick this up, she goes to prison. I know what she did was wrong. I know it. But she's still your mother. Please, don't destroy our family over money. Let me make it right. Take the check." I sat in the diner, the smell of stale grease and burnt coffee hanging in the air, and experienced the final, most devastating twist of my entire life. For 13 years, I had harbored a tiny, pathetic shred of sympathy for my father. I thought he was weak. I thought he was manipulated by Avery, just like I was. I thought he genuinely believed the lies she spun. I looked at the cashier's check. He had the money the whole time. "You knew," I stated. It wasn't a question. Logan swallowed hard, dropping his gaze back to his coffee cup. "I didn't know the extent of it. I swear. I didn't know she forged Richard Vance's notary stamp, but I knew she was pulling equity out of your grandmother's house. I knew she opened a few cards in your name. And you let her do it," I said, the absolute horror of his complicity washing over me. "She said it was temporary," he argued, a pathetic, desperate whine creeping into his voice. "She said if I stepped in, it would cause a divorce. I just wanted peace in my own house. I didn't want to fight with her. And you were always so resilient. You always figured things out. Delilah was fragile. She needed the help. Peace in his own house. He allowed his wife to commit federal identity theft against his eldest daughter, effectively ruining my 20s, plunging me into poverty and destroying my credit just so he wouldn't have to endure an argument with his wife. He sacrificed me for his own quiet evenings in front of the Golf Channel. And now, when the consequences of his cowardice had finally arrived at his doorstep, He was trying to buy his way out with a secret stash of cash he had hoarded while I ate instant ramen for a decade. This was the final climax, the ultimate severing of the bloodline. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. The absolute zero temperature in my chest crystallized into something unbreakable. I reached across the table and picked up the blue envelope. I opened it and pulled out the cashier's check. $50,000. It was more money than I had seen in my entire life. It could wipe out the remnants of my debt tomorrow. I looked Logan dead in the eye. I placed my fingers on the top edge of the thick bank paper and I ripped it in half. Logan gasped, his hands flying to his mouth. "What are you doing?" I put the two halves together and I ripped them again and again until the $50,000 that was nothing more than a pile of blue confetti on the sticky diner table. "The federal reports were filed on Friday," I said, dropping the last shreds of paper. "The FBI has already subpoenaed the bank. The Secret Service is opening a file on the counterfeit state notary seal. It is completely out of my hands now, and even if it weren't, I wouldn't stop it. I don't want your dirty hush money. I want justice." "You're a monster," Logan whispered, staring at the torn check in absolute horror. "No," I replied, standing up and buttoning my trench coat. "I'm an auditor, and your account is overdrawn." I walked out of the diner, leaving my father sitting alone with the shredded remains of his cowardice. The next morning, I was sitting in Harrison Reed's chaotic office. "The criminal side is moving faster than expected," Harrison said, pacing behind his desk. "Avery was officially indicted yesterday afternoon. Wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. She surrendered her passport. The feds aren't offering a plea deal that doesn't include a felony record and massive restitution." "What about Delilah?" I asked. "Named as an unindicted co-conspirator for now," Harrison replied. "Because she was a minor when the initial cards were opened and her direct forgery occurred later, the DA is using her to pressure Avery. But civilly is where we are going to draw blood." Harrison stopped pacing and pulled a thick, yellowed legal file from his desk. "I pulled your grandmother Eleanor's original probate file from 13 years ago," Harrison said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Your grandmother was a very, very smart woman. She didn't trust your mother at all." He opened the file and pointed to a highlighted section. "This is the fifth twist, my friend. Eleanor included an in terrorem clause, also known as a no contest clause, but she added a specific stipulation regarding fraudulent conveyance. The will states that if any beneficiary of the estate, which included Avery, who received the residual cash assets, commits fraud or acts in bad faith regarding the transfer of the primary real estate, their share of the estate is immediately forfeit and subject to clawback by the primary heir." I stared at the legal jargon, my mind racing to catch up. "What does that mean in plain English?" "It means," Harrison said, leaning across the desk, "that because Avery forged a mortgage to circumvent the legal probate transfer of that house, she violated the core terms of the will. I just filed a civil restitution suit under the probate code. We aren't just clearing the fraudulent debt from your name. We are seizing their assets to pay back the $45,000 in credit card debt you paid off over the last 13 years, plus interest, plus emotional distress." "They don't have that kind of liquid cash," I pointed out. "Logan's secret fund was only $50,000. Harrison's grin widened. "They don't need liquid cash. We filed a constructive trust against Delilah's Range Rover, since you have the emails proving she bought it with your stolen equity. The repo trucks are picking it up tomorrow morning. And as for your parents, the court has authorized a forced short sale of their suburban home to satisfy the civil restitution judgment. We are taking the roof over their heads to pay for the roof they stole from you." I sat back in the chair. The sheer, overwhelming symmetry of it was staggering. For 13 years, they had built their luxurious lives on the foundation of my stolen identity. Now the law was systematically dismantling their castle brick by brick and handing the mortar back to me. "Let them burn," I said quietly. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office. It wasn't a cubicle on the 14th floor. It was a corner suite on the 18th floor. I took a sip of my coffee and looked at the heavy brass nameplate sitting on my mahogany desk. Attorney at law. I hadn't just survived the fallout. I had used the fire to forge myself into something stronger. With the fraudulent debt finally wiped from my credit report and the massive civil restitution payout from the liquidation of my parents' assets, I had the financial stability to take a leave of absence. I spent 6 grueling months studying, sat for the state bar exam, and passed on my first try. Sterling and Vance didn't fire me. They promoted me. I was now a junior partner in the real estate litigation division. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Harrison Reed. We grabbed lunch once a month now, trading war stories. Just saw your sister working the makeup counter at Macy's. Thought you'd want to know. I looked at the text feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no malice, just the quiet satisfaction of the universe balancing its ledger. Avery hadn't gone to federal prison, but she hadn't escaped either. She accepted a brutal plea deal, a 5-year suspended sentence, 3,000 hours of community service, and a permanent felony record. She could never work in retail, finance, or administration ever again. The suburban socialites she had spent her life trying to impress treated her like a leper. With their house liquidated to pay my restitution, my parents had moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town. Logan had filed for divorce 6 months ago, unable to handle the poverty and the public shame. He was living in a rented room near the logistics warehouse, spending his days in bitter, cowardly silence. Delilah had it the worst. Stripped of her Range Rover, her wealthy fiancé, and her stolen funding, her influencer career had collapsed. The internet is ruthless when a self-made boss is exposed as a trust fund thief. Bankrupt and publicly disgraced, she was forced to get a minimum wage retail job just to make rent. There were no more family dinners, there were no more passive-aggressive comments. The Bennett family syndicate had been permanently dismantled. There was a soft knock on my office door. My paralegal, a sharp young woman named Sarah, walked in holding a thick stack of manila folders. "The final closing documents for your new house just came over from the title company," Sarah said, placing them on my desk with a smile. "Everything is cleared, escrow is fully funded, all they need is your signature." "Thank you, Sarah," I said. She left the room, closing the door quietly behind her. I pulled the documents toward me. It was a beautiful, historic brownstone in the city. Not a 5-bedroom farmhouse in the suburbs, but a solid, elegant home with exposed brick and a rooftop terrace. I opened the folder to the final page, the deed of trust. I picked up my favorite blue fountain pen. I looked at the signature block. I didn't have to practice. I didn't have to hesitate. I pressed the nib to the paper and signed my name. The loops were perfectly fluid. The cross on the T's slanted slightly upward. It was my name, my clean file, my life, finally returned to me. I closed the folder, leaned back in my chair, and looked out at the city skyline. I was 32 years old, and my credit score was a pristine 780. I might check it again tomorrow, not out of fear, just because it's mine. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this journey of taking back power and holding toxic people accountable, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of ultimate revenge. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next video.